New questions for President Trump after two women came forward saying they were undocumented immigrants while working at President Trump's New Jersey golf course.
Behind the pristine golf greens and polished suites of Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, a quiet world operated out of sight, run by workers expected to stay silent and invisible. Among them was Victorina Morales, a housekeeper hired in 2013 despite lacking legal immigration status. She cleaned Trump's private quarters, made his bed, and prepared his clothing, all while being warned never to speak in his presence. Though the public image of luxury and order was carefully maintained, Morales witnessed something very different. Supervisors helped her obtain false documents. Promised raises never came. Fear was constant. What did Morales see during those years in Trump's inner sanctum? And why did the silence around it last so long? What she reveals now challenges far more than just a public image. Victorina Morales didn't just clean rooms. She navigated a system built on secrecy, image, and calculated silence. As one of the few housekeepers granted direct access to Trump's private residence at Bedminster, she moved through spaces most Americans will never see. Carefully polished bedrooms, closets stocked with white golf shirts, and trophy-lined halls that served as monuments to image rather than reality. What made her role unusual wasn't just proximity. It was how often she was made to feel both essential and invisible at once. The aides weren't just housekeeping. They were a stage crew, behind a well-rehearsed production. Get in, get out, be quiet, don't be seen, and don't speak unless spoken to. Those words Morales remembers all too well. And she wasn't merely making the beds, she was upholding the illusion of effortless luxury. That meant knowing Trump down, to the smallest detail, from collar stiffness to toothpaste distribution. Any deviation meant trouble, not for the mistake itself, but for shattering the illusion. What she witnessed and the way she interpreted it complicated Morales's experience into something significant regarding status and control. Bedminster was not simply a place of work. It was an environment controlled in which the lighting and words spoke on behalf of hierarchy. Morales was in the house to serve, but never to belong. Her labor upheld luxury, but the story of that luxury was told without her voice or presence. That tension, having the privilege to touch the very private spaces of Trump while being told to vanish, illustrated yet another major theme running throughout the Trump brand, which is appearances over authenticity, obedience over acknowledgement. Morales lived in the margins of that empire, not just as a subservient worker, but also as a person whose mere presence questioned its very myth. Her presence proved that contradiction, and for years, it was that contradiction that made her silence far more valuable than her work. But behind those perfectly made beds and gleaming floors was a daily ritual few ever imagined, and even fewer were allowed to see. Victorina Morales spent years quietly working inside one of the most exclusive and private spaces in Donald Trump's world, his personal residence at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey. As a housekeeper, she was tasked with intimate duties, making his bed with exact precision, dusting his collection of trophies and memorabilia, and preparing his clothing before each visit. These tasks, while seemingly routine, exposed her to the personal rhythms and preferences of a man who carefully managed not only his public image, but also every detail of his private surroundings. Morales was instructed to be invisible when Trump was present. Staff were told to avoid eye contact, remain silent, and leave rooms before he entered them. This rule reinforced a hierarchy where workers, especially undocumented ones, were expected to serve without being seen or heard. Despite this, Morales observed many details of Trump's daily habits. He had a deep fixation on cleanliness and order. Everything in his living space, from how the towels were folded to the placement of toiletries, had to meet exact specifications. If something was out of place, it could trigger irritation or disciplinary action from supervisors. Morales was always at the center of Trump's obsession with presentation. It was no less evident in his clothing. Morales would prepare Trump's golf clothes with steaming and pressing to provide a perfect appearance. She recalled that Trump liked white shirts and trousers that looked crisp and unwrinkled even when no one but the staff would see him. His appearance was always tightly managed, which reflected a recurring theme of image maintenance that Morales and other workers identified as part of his persona. These rituals behind closed doors helped preserve the image of an effortless and powerful man. Even in such proximity, Morales feared never feeling secure or welcome. Her work was critical, yet her presence was never encouraged. Trump in Bedminster had another side rarely revealed to the public, a man with a monstrous control need and perfectionism that even seeped into the most intimate aspects of his life. For Morales, keeping the world pristine was not about luxury anymore. It was about reinforcing a carefully curated myth. Indeed, her silent work was part of the play that kept the illusion going. The revelations Morales shared were not isolated events. They pointed to a system that functioned on quiet exploitation. The Trump Organization's ability to maintain plausible deniability depended on a chain of command that delegated risk downward. Supervisors on site handled documentation issues, shielding upper management from direct accountability. This structure wasn't accidental. It created a gray zone where illegal hiring practices could flourish without formal acknowledgement. It's a pattern seen in many large corporations, but the stakes were uniquely high in this case because of Trump's vocal and public stance on immigration. What makes this case especially significant is how it exposed the fine line between enforcement and avoidance. Morales wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was wearing a uniform, clocking in, and following orders. Yet the very system that signed her checks also criminalized her presence. "They knew exactly who we were," Morales said. "But we were good workers, and that's all that mattered, until it didn't." That moment of expendability came when public scrutiny forced the Trump Organization to distance itself from workers like her, firing undocumented staff and claiming ignorance. This contradiction between public condemnation and private reliance raises ethical questions beyond just one employer. It touches on how American institutions, especially those with immense political power, benefit from undocumented labor while simultaneously scapegoating it. The exploitation of Morales was actively enabled. Workers were given the tools to remain employed under false identities, yet lived in daily fear that those same tools could be used against them. Protected, yet endangered. It's a duality favored by control. Morales's testimony, corroborated by co-workers and former Trump employees, helped chip away at the carefully maintained image of a law and order businessman. What was revealed instead was a culture of selective enforcement, positions rewarded for loyalty, silence, and punishment meted out when visibility was brought forth. The story of Morales crossed not only legal and political borders, but also gave insight into how the line itself had been moved, blurred, and ultimately erased to suit the needs of power. Yet while Morales spoke out at great personal risk, she forced many in this country to look squarely in the eye at an uncomfortable truth. Behind the slogans and policies lay an empire quietly built on the labor of those it publicly condemned. Victorina. Morales's job at Trump's Bedminster Golf Club involved more than housekeeping. It required surviving in a culture of constant fear and silence. As an undocumented worker, Morales was acutely aware that her immigration status made her vulnerable. She wasn't alone. According to reports and first-hand accounts from other former employees, the Trump Organization created an environment where undocumented staff were essential to daily operations, but their precarious legal standing was used as leverage to ensure compliance. Speaking out about mistreatment, unsafe conditions, or even simple scheduling issues risked immediate termination and, more terrifyingly, deportation. Managers at Bedminster were allegedly aware of the workers' undocumented status and, in many cases, helped them obtain falsified documents to get and keep their jobs. This complicity didn't offer protection. It became a tool of control. Morales told the New York Times that her supervisors would regularly remind her of how easily her employment and safety could be taken away. These veiled threats were powerful. With their livelihoods and legal status hanging in the balance, undocumented staff were effectively silenced, even when subjected to verbal abuse, long hours, or unfair treatment. The atmosphere went beyond mild threats. Morales described a setting in which workers had to pretend to be invisible when high-profile guests were about to arrive, especially when it came to Trump himself during the survey. Punishment varied from a very stern reprimand to termination, depending on the severity of the infraction. Exacting punishment for even a small mistake was commonplace. All fear was a tangible thing. Workers avoided confrontations, held back their dissent during sudden and inconsistent policy changes, and worked through intolerable conditions that they would have rejected outright had they felt secure in their jobs. They were in extreme power imbalances, which grew more blatantly obvious while they worked to assure their own undocumented labor force. Such a clandestine and covert culture was in stark contrast to public portrayals of Trump as the champion of American workers and the rule of law. Morales's narrative revealed layers of the Trump empire not often seen, a place where fear held operations together behind an outwardly polished facade. For the undocumented workers in Bedminster, the real wall was not at the southern border. It was the invisible wall erected around them by threats, silence, and systemic exploitation. Morales's act of courage reified the mechanism of fear, an institutionalized, deliberate tool for maintaining compliance and secrecy within Trump's private realm. While Donald Trump campaigned on a platform of building a border wall and cracking down on undocumented immigrants, Victorina Morales lived a daily contradiction of that rhetoric. Hired in 2013 to work at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey, Morales was undocumented and knew that many of her co-workers were as well. Despite Trump's public demands for mass deportations and tighter immigration enforcement, his business empire quietly relied on the labor of people like Morales to function. The elegant rooms, spotless bathrooms, and carefully ironed suits at Bedminster were made possible by the very workers he claimed were a threat to the nation. According to the New York Times investigation in 2018, Morales and several other employees were hired without proper documentation, and in some cases, supervisors assisted them in obtaining falsified papers. Morales said she was never asked directly about her immigration status when she was hired, and later a manager helped her acquire a fake Social Security number and green card to stay on payroll. This level of complicity inside the Trump organization directly contradicted the president's loud and aggressive stance on undocumented immigration. It wasn't just a blind spot. It was a structural part of his operations. For more than 5 years, Morales worked in security with duties that included cleaning Trump's private areas, making his bed, and laying out his clothes. She undertook these tasks with fear hovering over her, knowing that at any time her presence in the house could be wielded against her. Meanwhile, it was during Trump's speeches on national forums that he condemned undocumented immigrant workers as criminals, substance dealers, and invaders. Morales noticed the discrepancy between the image and reality. While he vilified undocumented workers in this country, his businesses worked to quietly supply undocumented workers to keep his image intact and serve his elite clientele. A painful dissonance, Morales might add. The charge of hypocrisy was never publicly acknowledged by Trump or his organization. Rather, after Morales and others came forward, the company contended that they had fired any undocumented workers that they could identify, though they denied having any prior knowledge of their legal status. In Morales's eyes, this was clearly contradicted by her experiences. The wall that Trump kept insisting on building on the border was never meant to apply to the people working under the roof of Trump's house, cleaning or ironing his pants. For her, the hypocrisy was deeply disappointing and deeply personal. This stands in stark opposition to all public pronouncements claiming that power walks a fine line when it feels like it. One of the larger truths is that undocumented people in the workplace are both neglected and indispensable throughout American labor systems. According to the sociologist Ruth Milkman, undocumented immigrants are the hidden engine of many service sector industries. Excluded from general protections is another point of contradiction. By emphasizing Morales' story, a narrative about politics that often tends to obscure an underlying economic dependency can be established. With such dependencies in focus, an entirely ingenious architecture punishes the very labor upon which it subtly banks to nourish its wealth and power. Yet being invisible wasn't enough. There were other rules, unwritten and quietly enforced. Victorina Morales quickly learned that loyalty at Trump's Bedminster Club was a currency, and one that came with strings attached. Just like at Trump Tower, where staff operated under a rigid hierarchy of favor and fear, Morales saw that those who remained silent, submissive, and eager to please were rewarded with praise or monetary tips. Trump himself occasionally handed her $50 or $100 as a gesture of appreciation. But these tips were not simply acts of generosity. They were tied to an unspoken expectation of obedience and deference. Gratitude was conditional, and any disruption of the carefully managed order risked swift punishment. Morales noticed that supervisors closely monitored staff behavior and kept track of who followed the unspoken rules. Those who flattered Trump or followed instructions to the letter were more likely to receive praise or better shifts. But if an employee questioned anything, spoke up about mistreatment, or even made a small mistake, the response could be severe. Morales recalled being scolded for something as minor as improperly folding towels, an offense that would be recorded and potentially used against her if future issues arose. Praise was never just praise. It was a test of continued loyalty. Favoritism ruled the application of punishments. An employee who once shared Trump's favor might suddenly find him or herself facing downgrading or disciplinary action for a trivial fault. This kept everyone off balance and hustling to stay in good graces. It was a strategy throughout Trump's business. Encourage loyalty with rewards, but keep the fear of rejection and public humiliation alive in the back of their minds. Morales explained that this unpredictable due and deserve creates instability, that a simple missed button on a shirt could be the difference between being rewarded and getting fired. This dynamic was by no means only Morales' description. Many of her co-workers themselves described the same environment. The workplace rewarded the good and threatened the bad, just like the sprawling image at large that Trump created for himself throughout his business and political life. Workers figured that they were judged not according to their skills or ethics, but according to how well they catered to the image loyalty silent system in which Morales worked. For undocumented workers like Morales, the stakes had risen yet again. A single failure did not merely endanger a job, it put their entire future at stake. In this environment, loyalty wasn't merely encouraged, it became coerced, enforced, and manipulated. Victorina Morales vividly recalls the tension that rippled through Trump's Bedminster estate the day Donald Trump erupted in anger over a seemingly minor issue, a misplaced item in his private quarters. Though the outburst wasn't directed at her, the message was loud and clear. Perfection was mandatory, and any deviation could ignite his fury. Trump's temper was legendary among staff, and this particular incident served as a stark reminder that even the smallest oversight could spark a volatile reaction. For undocumented workers like Morales, moments like this weren't just stressful, they were dangerous, with livelihoods and legal safety on the line. Staff quickly learned to anticipate Trump's triggers. According to Morales, there was an obsessive attention to detail in his private spaces. Any deviation, however trivial, was seen as a sign of disrespect or incompetence. In the incident she described, the outburst came over a missing hair product. Though another worker was ultimately blamed, the fear among the entire housekeeping team lingered for days. No one knew who might be next, and the staff doubled down on silence and precision to avoid attracting attention. It wasn't a freak incident. Morales and the others mentioned how quickly Trump turned moody with the silliest reason, throwing his usual mood, from negative reports on him to suddenly reported interruptions of routine. A cold cup of coffee or other things, even something like an ill-placed light during a video shoot, might set off the switch for former Trump Tower butler Denham. Such patterns developed a psychological pressure atmosphere where employees walked around like thieves on a high tightrope without a net. Just one faux pas, real or imagined, could mean the difference between being chewed out, demoted, or quietly, suddenly replaced. Now for Morales, it was precisely this outburst that defined all these power dynamics. Trump could frighten people by yelling into a box. But more than that, he could create an atmosphere of unreliability where workers were made to feel they had no room for error. It wasn't the item causing the reaction, it was control over the situation. Employees learned too quickly not to think of cleaning up after a billionaire, but as doing something in a space where very much just being there could be a problem. For Morales, the memory of that day underscores the stakes under a system in which fear was part of the work requirement, as much by assignment as any physical task. While Donald Trump commanded attention with his volatile moods and public bravado, Melania Trump operated in stark contrast. Victorina Morales, who worked as a housekeeper at Trump's Bedminster Golf Club, described Melania as quiet, composed, and highly observant. She rarely engaged with the housekeeping staff, offering little in the way of personal interaction or small talk. But her silence, according to Morales, wasn't indifference. It was intentional. Melania noticed everything, from the condition of Trump's clothing to the arrangement of his personal items, and her presence carried a subtle but unmistakable authority within the household. Morales observed that Melania rarely intervened in daily operations, but her preferences were clearly communicated through intermediaries. The staff knew which rooms needed extra attention when Melania was expected, and they understood her standard for perfection without ever receiving direct orders. This created a different kind of pressure, one rooted not in fear of outbursts like Trump's, but in the unspoken expectation of flawless execution. Melania's influence wasn't loud or forceful, but it was deeply felt by those working behind the scenes. Denham, the ex-butler at Trump Tower and a witness in this larger story, termed the conduct by Melania quite the same at the Manhattan residence. Unlike Trump, she was seldom emotive or reactive, yet her silence spoke volumes. The staff swiftly learned that she would never forget a slight, even if she never directly confronted the perpetrator. Morales agreed, arguing that Melania's cool demeanor disguised a much sharper strategic consciousness. She registered who was in the room, how Trump treated people, and their response to him. Very much, she played the long game, watching, storing information, and silently forging her position in the Trump inner circle. Morales says Melania was harder to read than Trump, but was no less powerful. In an unpredictable household, she was a source of tension in her own right. Morales believed Melania's quiet attention gave her the high ground. She didn't need to raise her voice to understand everything going on around her. In such a family and business empire full of image and performance, that was a kind of vigilance in its own right. Melania's more covert control of the household is itself a reflection of the larger dynamic often seen in families at the upper echelons of power, where influence is exerted not by ill temper but rather by presence and consistency. The culturally inclined have compared her behavior to one of the traditional first ladies who worked in the background yet manipulated environments around them. Think of Jackie Kennedy and her quiet control over the aesthetics within the White House and, conversely, Nancy Reagan's behind-the-scenes political machinations. In contrast to public policy, Melania exercised supervisory authority over strict, private matters. Morales and all the other staff members learned to read her silence as an instruction, therefore interpreting every sidelong glance or delay in response as laden with meaning. This silent authority fitted Trump's obsession with control. She would never directly defy it, but retained a shadow influence through observation, memory, and the power of remaining just out of reach. After years of quiet service at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, Victorina Morales made the life-altering decision to go public in 2018. For more than 5 years, she had endured the contradiction of working closely inside Donald Trump's private residence while hearing him vilify immigrants like her on national platforms. As the president doubled down on anti-immigrant rhetoric, calling for border walls and mass deportations, Morales found it increasingly unbearable to stay silent. She told the New York Times she could no longer reconcile his public attacks with the private reality that undocumented immigrants were helping maintain the luxury properties he profited from. Morales said the decision to speak out was deeply personal and grounded in a moral obligation. She had hoped Trump's election would bring real change, even expressing early support for him, believing he would improve the country. But as his presidency unfolded and she continued working in a system that exploited undocumented labor, she realized she was contributing to a lie. "We are tired of the abuse, the insults, the way he talks about us," she said, describing how painful it was to hear Trump demean immigrants while his businesses quietly relied on them to function. The fear of retaliation was something Morales had to take very seriously. By coming forward, she was risking not only her own job, but also her deportation and her family's safety. She had seen others who were warned into silence or fired under suspicious circumstances. More than anything, she thought it more important to tell the truth than to be comfortable. Morales was not acting for any political or financial reason. She even turned down offers to monetize her story. The only goal she had was to expose a dark reality that she felt the American public should have known, that the anti-immigrant image of Trump was all a carefully constructed illusion. By breaking the silence, she stood for many undocumented workers who worked in the shadows for Trump. Her testimony added another dimension of credibility to investigations into the Trump organization's hiring practices. It forced the public to grapple with really uncomfortable truths about immigration, labor, and power. For Morales, speaking out took a lot of courage and an assertion that dignity cannot be contingent upon legal status, especially when these people provide the very basis of power for those who condemn them. The Morales decision coincided with the boiling point of the national conversation on immigration, and her voice brought a human face to policies often discussed in the